Hey, bye, Thomas here. Today we're going to be going over some things that I haven't really talked about in the past. We're going to be going over what are some tools that you may need when operating a sawmill, whether for hobby use, for light production, whatever that may be. These are some ideas that you might want to think into and tie into that cost of owning a sawmill. A sawmill is a large investment, whether it be a manual mill or a fully hydraulic mill. There's a lot of other associated costs with that. And to top this off, on April 19th, Two Brother Outdoors, when we do the sawmill roundtable, I'll be on that next show as well. We'll be discussing this very topic, or what are some things you need to have around your sawmill. Now, I'm going to go over things that we have and that are crucial to our business and stuff like that, and our way of life here on the farm. They're, everyone's might differ, but these are just some ideas to think about to really tie into that cost, so you're not, left hanging when you have to say, okay, I've just bought a $15,000, $20,000, $50,000 sawmill, whatever it may be. Oh, but I have to buy another $15,000 worth of equipment to actually run that sawmill at its maximum capability. So we're gonna go start off, no real order, but we're just gonna go through things that I have here in front of us. A chainsaw. It may sound silly, but yes, a chainsaw is very crucial when operating a sawmill. If you get logs from a logger, if you get logs from a tree surgeon, the folks that go around town and cut trees or anything, those logs may not come to you in a size that you can handle or a size that you're wanting to cut. AKA, if they're giving you only 25-foot logs and your log deck on your sawmill is only cutting 16 foot, you've got to cut that off. So a chainsaw is a very crucial tool to have on there. Also, chainsaws, we use them all the time on the sawmill to cut any sticks, branches, anything off of the log where it may protrude past the rails or get stuck on our log stops. Oftentimes, if you're cutting really, really unique stuff, you can even look at that pine over there. It's got all sorts of knots and branches. But if you're cutting really, really unique stuff, say black walnut, maple, something that's got a lot of weird knots and branches and stobs coming off of it, you might need to trim those down. Oftentimes around the sawmill, we do have multiple chainsaws. We'll have a big chainsaw for, say, cutting off the butt of a log if it's too long, and we might use a smaller chainsaw to do the trimming on the log if it's on the log deck. Just got to be careful if you're cutting on your sawmill deck that you don't run metal into metal, because metal does not cut metal that well if it's a chainsaw blade. So we keep usually a few around here. I see there's one right there. Usually my dad has 3 or 4 chainsaws around here, which is easier to grab. Okay, another thing you will need, I don't care if you have a manual mill or if you have a fully hydraulic mill, a cant hook is a must. There are times when we are trying to turn a log, and even though we have these fancy dancy turners and log dogs and stuff like that and log stops, sometimes the turner just can't turn it, or sometimes we don't want to use those because we might hurt the face of the wood if it's something really expensive, like say a black walnut mantle. I'm not going to turn a black walnut mantle or even a black walnut beam with that turner there. I may turn it with a cant hook if I use say like a piece of bark or something like that to put on there, so I'm not digging into the face of the wood. But a cant hook, regardless, handling logs around the log yard, just moving things around is a must-have. That's one of the first things whenever I bought my first sawmill. I was like, oh my goodness, I don't have a cant hook. Then I searched around and I said, I need to find the most robust cant hook I could possibly find. And the one that I bought and settled on was a Cook's cant hook. It's square tubing, 2-inch tubing. It's built like a tank, and it just absolutely is amazing. I've run it over with the tractor. I've done everything with it. It ain't gonna hurt it. My dad, I believe that's the log saw cant hook there. It's an aluminum shaft, but I will say it is quite strong. I haven't broke it yet, but I do like my things rough and tough. Let me walk around over here and we can go over a few things a little bit closer and out of the sun. Okay, another thing that is very crucial is a level, a long level at that. So that's just a 4-foot level there. A level is very important to always check your sawmill, the deck of the sawmill, the head of the sawmill, anything you're checking for level. You need to have a long level as well as a short little torpedo level, which we use to check the blade of the sawmill quite often. Another thing, I haven't seen a sawmill really out there that doesn't require some type of grease, so having a grease gun is very important. We also like to change these out to these kind of like little quick fittings right here that really grip on. These quasi keep your hands cleaner, but there's all sorts of grease fittings on here. We've got on the roller bearings here, on the guide bearings, there's grease fittings on the carriage itself, all sorts of stuff like that. So having, like I said, the grease gun is a must-have as well on the sawmill. Okay, blades. We're not really gonna get into blades. Everyone knows you have to have a saw blade to run a sawmill. We might talk about the sharpener system here in a second, but we're gonna head out here to the log yard and show you what my dad's doing. So you buy yourself a sawmill and everything. Well, you have to have something to handle the logs with, whether it's getting on and off the sawmill, whether it's handling them around the log yard, and we use a tractor. Tractor is our #1 way of getting the logs, if we get them off our property, out of the woods, and it's a #1 way that we handle logs in our log yard. So a lot of people use a tractor, some people use a skid steer, forklift, whatever it may be. I've seen people also use four-wheelers with like a log arch. There's many different ways, and based on whatever equipment you already have and everything. I've seen people with boom poles on forward 8 ends. They use that to move logs around and put logs onto the sawmill. But some piece of equipment to move logs around the sawmill is a must-have if you're going to handle a lot of logs on at your operation. Another thing, as you can see, we had this log yard. My dad's been working on this log yard for the past, I don't know, 2 weeks or so. He's been kind of cleaning it up, getting rid of old logs and stuff like that. Well, you got to have a way to store your logs, and you got to not store them on the ground. So we're going to go out here and show. Now this is if you are cutting at your own place or have people that drop off stuff. If you're cutting on the customer's property, if you're going to do a travel sawmill, you don't necessarily need to have a log yard. But for us, we have to have a log yard, and as you see, we put all of our logs in different piles based on species. This pile right here in front of us is all cherry, and if you look underneath of it, you can see air underneath of it. We want to keep these up off the ground. Some of these logs were at the bottom of a pile, and Dad's been reorganizing, so you can see the logs that were at the bottom of the pile. Yeah, they've got some rot and stuff on there, but centers are still good. Cherry's one of those woods. It can handle a little bit of rot on the outside. That one right there looks kind of rough, but long story short, you need to have a system of storing your logs before you need to cut them, and you need to have them up off the ground. That's crucial, especially if anywhere in the South. Up in Wisconsin, I could get away with it through a good portion of the year, because a good portion of the year the ground may be frozen, but you really just need to get them up off the ground as best you can. Also, that's a pile of cherry. That right there is all poplar. That is old oak that I think he might turn into burn pile. There's actually a piece of maple in the front there. This is just kind of like the scraggly black walnut. This is the big black walnut with lots of knots. This is the long black walnut with minimal knots, excuse me. And then we have a short black walnut pile kind of over here, which is clear of knots and stuff like that. Now that one does have some metal, it looks like. But we try to separate them by species and by size. Now he does have a couple pine here in front, but the pine here in front, that's a job he's cutting currently, so he's going to quickly rotate those through. And we also have, looks like some maple on top of oak. We've got a white oak pile over there, red oak pile there. That's all red oak until you get to that pile, then it's maple, and it looks like it could be some ash over there. So our log yard is very open, so we can move the tractor around. It's very important that, again, store those logs up off the ground. It helps to slow down the bug decay, the water rot, and things like that. And of course, we got a big old pile of cedar over there. Okay, I think we've talked about most of the things you need around this. Oh, there we go, right there in front of me. It would be best, it's not 100% needed, but you should have some type of building to store your sawmill. You don't want your sawmill, your investment, your potential money maker, being exposed to the elements all the time. We've designed this building. Now it looks kind of rough for wear. I mean, we built this quickly. We didn't have a lot of infrastructure out here. This building's been around here for a good little while. And it does have a little sag to the ceiling there, but that's a 25 or 4 foot span. I can't remember how big our opening is, but you should have a way to store your sawmill. My other sawmill, for about 3 months, I left it out in the elements, and I would cover up the head with tarps and stuff like that. But it's best if you have a permanent building to store your sawmill. Also, on the side here, we usually have an area for the tractor. We like to keep that tractor right next to it. And if you notice, my dad's actually driving my tractor because his tractor, while moving logs around, he knocked off the valve stem off of one of his tires. So he said, hey, my tractor's in the shop. I'm gonna borrow your tractor today. I'm like, okay. Okay, so I think we've talked about just about everything around the sawmill. Now let's go up and show some other equipment that is definitely needed when having a sawmill. Okay, I know it might sound silly. A truck is not a bad idea to have. Not saying you have to have a truck, but a truck that is able to carry heavy loads is a must-have. Now this is one of our farm trucks here. This is my old truck from way back when. But yeah, a truck that you can use to haul trailers around, put equipment in, put logs in, whatever it may be, that's kind of a big deal. I can't tell you how many times when we lived down in Mississippi and people would drop off wood with me and be like, hey, I don't really have, or excuse me, I'd go pick up wood from them. They'd say, hey, I don't really have a truck or anything. Can you deliver the wood? And I could deliver the wood within a reasonable distance. A lot of times if I had a truck, I can just throw it in the bed of the truck if it wasn't that big of a job. If it's a larger job, I can put it on the trailer. Now there are also times when people would bring their own truck and trailer or a borrowed truck and trailer. And I've got a little funny story. I'm going to talk about that when we show you the next piece of equipment. Okay, you have to have a trailer. A trailer is very important if you're going to do a larger scale operation. If you're just going to be taking your mill around and cutting at other people's places, you can get by without probably having a trailer. But for us, we have to have trailers to haul logs, trailers to deliver wood, trailers to move equipment around. So if we're going to take our slabber mill, if we're going to take the tractor, if we're going to cut somewhere else, we have to have those large trailers to move stuff around. These are 2 of the 4 trailers we have. And if you notice, this first trailer here, it's a 20-foot bed with the 5-foot dovetail. It's dual tandem. This is a 22,000 pound trailer. This is our big heavy log hauler, and we had some of these custom little log stops, if you will, made. These just go right into the little tubing here on the side of the sawmill and everything. We had a buddy of ours go ahead and gin these up. Both my trailer, and my dad's trailer, we have a couple sets of these. Very important to have these on here, because if you're ratcheting down or chaining down logs on there, this just gives you a little more, I guess, protection, if you will, or safety. Also, when you're loading those logs on there, way back in the day before we even had these, we would take like a chunk of wood like this, put it on here, or maybe a small log, and as you roll the log onto there, it might stop it or it might not. It might roll off the back side. But having these on here was very critical in actually keeping the logs on there and just keeping it just a little bit safer when you're traveling down the road. Now, the little funny story I was going to tell you about was a few years ago when down in Mississippi, I had a guy come by and he said, hey, I'd like you to cut up, I think it was around 2,000 board foot of pine. It was a lot of pine and everything. And I said, yeah, I'll cut the pine up for you, no problem. I picked up the logs and everything. No, excuse me. He had the logs delivered via a 18-wheeler dump trailer. So they dumped out the logs in the front yard. So he came over, he dropped off all these logs. He said he needed 2,000 board foot of mostly 2x6 material. And I said, okay, I've got your job done. Make sure you bring a big enough trailer to put all the wood on there. And I said, I'll load it up for you. So he brought a nice trailer and everything. What I really should have said to him is make sure you bring a big enough trailer and truck. The truck that he brought was not capable of carrying the wood. And I told him, I said, hey, that's a pretty small truck. Do you have the brakes hooked up to this? He's like, no, I don't have an 8-pin connector. He was using a flat 4. Long story short, I said, I'll load you up, but I really don't feel comfortable with you leaving out of here. And he insisted that he could drive home. He only had a few miles to go, no problem. So he had an F-150 with a 14,000 pound flatbed trailer behind it with no brakes on it. And I loaded 2,000 board foot of 2x6s up to 20-foot long lengths. So there's a lot of weight on that trailer. And I said, hey, I always tell people a little joke. I said, haha, you know, it's guaranteed to the end of the driveway. And also, if you keep it under 80, you should be good. Well, he was driving down the road, driving through Hurley, Tennessee. And he said when he came up to that first stop sign, he tried to stop, but he didn't. He just went straight on through. So after that, it kind of gave him a little bit of pucker factor, and he did about 30 miles an hour from that point forward. But you just make sure your truck, like I said, a large enough vehicle to go with your large enough trailer, and make sure you have brakes. All right, let's go to the next thing. Okay, next, once you cut all of your wood, it would be good to have a place to store said wood. Now my dad, he's got a pile of pine, you can see right over there. He actually just kind of dumped that all there. My son will help him stack all that wood later. But this is one of the places where we store and dry our wood, is right here underneath one of the eaves of the barn. We also have vertical storage inside the barn. Having a place to store your beautiful wood that you just cut is very crucial. If you leave your wood out in the elements with the rain, the sun, it will get warped, weathered, grayed, all sorts of stuff like that. And that's not really what the customers are going to want to see. Now, towards the end right here, this is where we keep all of our mantle blanks. And I recently sold off about 30 or so mantle blanks, and I've got 15 or so right there. I got a couple of those down the way. For our really expensive wood, we will store that inside the barn, and we will kind of air dry it for a number of years before we try to sell that. But again, a place to store your wood is pretty critical. Okay, so we've talked about the basic things right now. A chainsaw, a tractor or something to handle and move your logs around with, cant hooks, a big level to check your sawmill to make sure everything's level on it, a grease gun, because every single sawmill that I know of has grease fittings and everything. You want to make sure you keep your equipment lubed up, a truck or some type of vehicle that can haul around wood if you're delivering wood, or tow your sawmill around, or whatever that may be, a trailer to haul logs or to take wood to customers. Those are some of like the basic, okay, here's what you kind of have to have. Now let's talk about some of the things you don't have to have, but would be a good idea to have. So for my dad here, this is kind of an interesting setup he has here. Before he had water to his sawmill, now he runs water on his blade, I run diesel on my blade. He runs water on his blade because it's readily available, and based on the, I guess the amount of wood and how much he's running and stuff like that, water's been working out fine for him. There's a lot of different things. But before we had water out here, he also had a rain collection system off of the building. So you'll see it's just a pipe cut in half, angled down, everything with a little spout, and that drops directly into these barrels, which are probably full of mosquito larvae. And then as you can see, it falls into this barrel here. But if you run a sawmill and if you go through a dry spell during the summertime, you could easily go through a whole barrel of water before you know it. This right here, this might look crazy to you. This is just a U shape of PVC pipe. We fill it up with water, and because of where it is down there, water will even equal out between the two barrels. It works. It's like it'll siphon over if the barrels are you know, one's a little bit more full than the other, because rain will fall into here, but then it'll actually push over to this barrel here. Now if you do lose suction, if one of these becomes airbound, then it will no longer work. You just have to make sure you have that full of water. Neat little trick there. Then he has this little handy dandy little pipe right here, this hose, this garden hose, which goes to this electric pump and this switch right here. And then it goes over to that white pipe, and that's how he can fill up his water jug on the sawmill without having to take it off. It's just a neat little add that they added to the sawmill. Not needed, but it is a nice to have. Another piece of equipment or a thing that people might want to look at if they're going to be cutting a lot of wood for people, and if they really want to do the finished product for people, aka good dry wood, is a kiln. My buddy Neil down in Mississippi, he has built a solar kiln, and his solar kiln, he's been running a lot of wood through it. A solar kiln, he was able to go on to, everyone's seen the Virginia Tech model and stuff like that. He has some variation of that. He's modified it a little bit himself, but a kiln will allow you to dry the wood quickly. And when I say quickly, it's all relative. You should always air dry your wood for the first month to 3 months or something like that. So air dry it first, then throw it into a kiln. If you throw it directly into a kiln, which you can do, you're gonna get a freaking rainforest in there. So it's always best, let her air dry a little bit before you throw it right into the kiln and everything. And it allows the wood to gradually decrease that moisture and to stay a little more stable, if you will. But a kiln is a great idea. For us, we don't have a kiln here. We've talked about adding a kiln many times. We just haven't got around to it yet. We just air dry. Air dry has been working well for us, but it takes longer for your wood to dry out. For us, the rule of thumb is 1 year per inch of thickness of wood when it's in its cut up form. There are people that say, oh, this log is dry, it's been sitting there for 10 years. I guarantee you, I can take a 20-year-old log that's been sitting around, cut it open, it's going to have greater than 20% moisture content on the inside. Logs don't really dry in the center portion of the log in a log form. The ends will check on you and start to dry, but that center portion will always be dry. So you can have logs that are seasoned a little bit on the outside and everything. You can continue to cut those. It'll take a little bit of moisture out there, but until you open up that wood, you're not really going to remove that moisture. Once you air dry, for us, we usually let wood air dry for 1 to 2 years before we offer it to the public. If we do have wood here on our property that we're going to sell to the public and they want it now, we will tell them, hey, we guarantee it to the end of the driveway. Moisture content on this wood is 18% or whatever it may be with our moisture meter, which gets me to the moisture meter. A moisture meter, not necessarily needed to be had. If you're cutting at people's places, you don't really need to know that stuff, but if you're cutting at your own place and if you're wanting to sell quality wood to people, a moisture meter is a good idea. I've just got a little cheapy pin connector moisture meter. There's a whole lot of different types out there. Whatever works best for you. I mean, people sometimes will bring their own moisture meter, and when they're buying wood from a small town sawyer and stuff like that, and that's totally fine. About the driest you can dry wood through air drying, 11-12% maybe, if you are in certain situations. In actuality, if you can get wood below 15% air drying, that's about as good as you're going to get, unless you live in some desert or something like that. Okay, another tool which I will show some pictures of, and I can link in the description below. Not needed, but if you are nerding out on your sawmill stuff, it might be something you might think about. A blade tensioning tool. And really it just tells you what your tension is in your blade. I've got a tensioner device or anything. You put it onto the blade on 2 points. You secure it down with the metal screws and everything. And then you go ahead and start to tension your blade and everything. And once your blade is tensioned to whatever the desired specs are, you can see what the tension is and see if there's anything out of spec on your blade. I've done some testing on that to see what is the best tension to use on a blade. But again, it's not needed. It was just kind of, we had some questions and stuff like that we were trying to answer and trying to figure out the different tensioning techniques on different sawmill manufacturers between Wood-Mizer, Timber King, Cooks, and trying to figure out what is that sweet spot that your blade needs to be out. And we found it to be, I think it was around like between 15 to 20,000 PSI on the blade when you tension it up. And that through, moment levers and stuff like that, and the way that the company tensions their blades can vary on what the actual PSI reading would be on your machine. So for us, the Timber King one, as you can see, we're about 1100 PSI, and that gives us the appropriate tension in our blade. Some Wood-Mizers might be near 2000 PSI, and some Cooks one might even be higher than that. It's all based on where that spring is measuring from, or that gauge there, and kind of like the math associated with it. Once you know what the tension needs to be, then you're pretty much dialed in all the time. Okay, what else can we think of? There's gonna be a lot of questions and comments about this on the show on April 19th, so I will also put that in the description below. These are just some of the basic things. I'm sure there's other things out there, and we'll head up to the barn here and I'll show you our sharpening setup, because if you're going to do it large scale, you're going to need to find ways to save money. And one way to save money in the long run might be to sharpen and set your own blades. So let's head up there. Okay, so if you're going to be running a lot of wood through your sawmill, and you're going to go through a lot of blades and everything, one thing you might want to look at getting is a sharpener and setter. We've run the Timber King sharpener and setter. We've run the Cook's cat claw sharpener and setter. And as you see right here, we have the Wood-Mizer BMS 250 and the BMT 200 setter. So these are great pieces of equipment. It uses the CBN wheel and everything to actually do all the sharpening, but there's a lot of different sharpeners out there. Just find out what is kind of like the best sharpening tool for you. These are quite spendy, these 2 units right here, but based on the number of blades that we sharpen, what we use here, this worked out well for us. My buddy, Mr. Robert, he uses this down there. We did have, like I said, the Cook sharpener, absolutely loved it. And it gave you, I guess, a little more variability, like you could sharpen different types of blades and stuff like this. We stick with a 10-30 blade for just about everything. And this sharpener right here, as long as we have the correct CBN wheel, that's what we use. So there's that. Again, not needed. You could also find local people in your area to sharpen blades for you and set those blades, or you can actually send them off to some of the programs that Wood-Mizer and other sawmill manufacturers have, where they can actually receive blades from the customer and sharpen and set them. But really, to tell you the truth, what would save you is if you can find someone locally in your area, or even look at doing it yourself. Okay, here's another interesting thing to think about when you have a sawmill. What do you do with all of your sawdust? We put all of our sawdust kind of in this pile over here next to the wood edge, if you will. And as we need sawdust, we'll just go get bucketfuls. Right here, we also have one of our burn piles. And it's not that far away from the actual sawmill, but it's down the hill and it's to the east of the direction of our sawmill. And the reason is because most of the time winds here blow from the west to the east. So if we were going to burn stuff close to the sawmill, it's going to push it away. Now, yes, there is a pile of sawdust over there. That pile is pretty wet and everything, but the pile of sawdust underneath the sawmill, you don't really want to have it pile up. So you need to have a place to put your sawdust and a good place to burn. And then after we burn everything down, we usually come in here with the bucket on the tractor and everything, and we'll use this material to put into our gardens. The burnt wood material and everything else, it's really good for a base in your garden and everything. It's almost like, you know, you're adding all the extra nitrogen into the soil from all the trees that you just burn up. So you have to have a good way to get rid of your wood that you're using, or aka your offcuts, and then a good place to put your sawdust. We have people come out here all the time. We offer them, hey, if you ever want any sawdust, mostly that pile there is pine and oak and stuff like that. We don't put anything that's super heavy in tannic acid like black walnut sawdust. That's what we try to throw onto the fire to get rid of, because it can be hazardous to animals and stuff like that. Okay, so here's another thing. So a lot of times when we cut logs to a certain length, we will have good sections of hardwood left over. And a lot of this is actually good firewood. So this right here is kind of like the weird offcut pile of some logs that we cut, or maybe logs that weren't quite big enough to throw into the sawmill, but we didn't quite want to like burn them up. So we tell people from church, from the local community, hey, if you have the need for firewood and stuff like that, come on out here, grab as much as you want and everything. Plus my dad cuts his own firewood for their fireplace and everything. So him and Tommy will come out here. There's a few pieces here on the ground and everything. They'll get out here with the chainsaw, cut them to size, and split them up and everything. Also, our other hardwood offcuts that we have, this is just a pile, it looks like mostly white oak. There's a few poplar pieces in there, but we again will tell people, hey, we have a pile of hardwood that's quasi-seasoned. We try to keep it up off the ground. As you can see, it's up on these rotten pieces of pine, but it is up off the ground, so it can kind of season over time. Again, we tell people from church, if you want to, come on out here. You can get all the wood you want. These are just offcuts that we just didn't throw into the burn pile. We also do have another large burn pile down here, as you can see behind all these goofy logs right here. These are logs, just not the greatest quality. I don't know what my dad's gonna do with them. Some of them are just goofy, nasty logs. It just happens as you build up your log pile over time. Sometimes you just can't get to some of the logs fast enough. But we do have a burn pile there. It looks like it's mostly pine and just offcuts of just nasty stuff over there. All the woodworking stuff, the good stuff, is kind of there in the center portion of the yard and on the perimeter. But in this area here, this is a free-for-all. Anyone wants to come and get this, they can come get this. Now, two other things I briefly talked about, chains and tie-down straps, like ratchet straps. Those are great if you're going to be moving stuff around. Another thing I can't speak highly enough about, this doesn't look like much. That's just a sticker for stacking lumber. Now this one here has been drove over by the truck and everything. See, it's got a crack there. But we make a lot of sticker stackers for all the wood that we sticker and stack for our customers that they're going to pick it up. So you can never have enough of these. This one right here looks to be just pine, and I just happen to pick it up on the ground because when we load up stuff on people's trailers, we usually have bucketfuls of these offcuts that we cut down into sticker stackers. And it's just great to have, again, when you load up onto people's trailers, you can air dry the wood into a stack, load it onto a trailer with the tractor and everything, and it will continue to air dry until the customer uses the wood. So I think I've covered most everything that I can think of that we use here on our farm. I'm going to kind of do a listing in the description below. One last time trying to go through this. Once you have a sawmill, you're going to need a chainsaw, you're going to need a grease gun, you're going to need a big level, you're going to need something to handle the logs with, aka tractor, a log arch on a four-wheeler, whatever that may be, some type of tool to move the logs around on your property. You're going to need chains and tow straps, or chains and ratchet straps or anything if you're going to haul things around just to secure and tie things down. You're going to need a vehicle, a large enough vehicle and a large enough trailer to haul stuff around, or a large enough vehicle to haul your sawmill around. You're going to need a place to store your logs if you're doing it on your property, a place to dry the wood once you cut it, a place to store your sawmill so it's not in the elements, or some way to cover up the important portions, aka the intake, exhaust, saw head, stuff like that on your sawmill. You're going to need a way to sharpen your own blades, or have a, some method of getting them sharpened out in town, or do it yourself, or send them off, whatever it may be. If you are not going to do it yourself, look in your local area. There's actually quite a few people, you'd be surprised, they actually have sharpener systems and stuff like that. You need a place to store your logs up off the ground. I think we kind of talked about that. And a place to get rid of your sawdust at. We like to give stuff away to the community. And a place to burn your offcuts, because you will have more wood than you can think of having your own sawmill of just weird offcuts. So we burn stuff, we then reuse that into our gardens. We also have stuff back here like I'm talking about that we give out to people from church and the community, whatever. We just say, hey, if you come over, if you need any kind of hardwoods for your fireplace and stuff like that, come on by. We are absolutely using more than we could ever need here. I mean, my dad and my son come out here all the time. They're splitting wood for next season and everything. And then a place, if you can, to collect water or whatever lubricant you're using. If you're using diesel, then just, that doesn't really apply to you. But if you are going to run water, make sure you have a way to keep water on your blade, or some kind of coolant on there. I guess that's about the gist of it. Hopefully I've answered some part of the questions. I have to review back to the video, but there's a lot of associated costs with owning a sawmill. But I will say there's nothing more rewarding than having your own sawmill, and you'd be like, you know what, I'm going to do some kind of custom work in my house. You try pulling off a board and it's a weird size. It's like, it doesn't matter. I have a sawmill. I can cut whatever weird size. I can plane it down, whatever it needs to be. But the fact that you can produce stuff off your own farm or off your own mill, it's awesome. It's the best feeling in the world. I love it when I'd be like, okay, I'm going to just cut a lot of random wood. I need to go build a cabin for the kids, or I'm going to build a deer stand for the next hunting season. it's just very rewarding. And right now we're rebuilding a house, so we've utilized our sawmill all over the place, and we've utilized all these tools that I've talked about in this video to ensure that our sawmills operate at the best and highest capability they can. Down in Mississippi, I ran it as a small business. Up here in Tennessee, I'm really just running it for myself. My dad's running his small business, and just absolutely doing a great job selling it to the public and everything, and just cutting new random things all the time. So hope this was helpful, informational, beneficial, whatever it may be. Enjoy yourselves. Be safe out there. Owning a sawmill is a great passion of mine. I've always wanted one when I was younger and everything, and finally growing up to get one and then getting to talk about it on YouTube channels. It's just like, just full circle. I absolutely love it. I don't care what brand you have out there. Just the fact of owning a sawmill is a great achievement. So enjoy your sawmill, be safe out there, and be mindful of the sawdust you have out there. Like I said, certain sawdusts are very unhealthy, and make sure if you're cutting something, say a black walnut or cedar, and maybe if you're cutting an absolute ton of cherry, look into a mask, respirator, something like that, and just be mindful of that sawdust. Until then, we'll see you around. Thanks.